Hey there, this is Natalie, and today someone drew my attention towards a tweet thread by High Guardian Spice creator Ray Rodriguez, talking about the reasons he feels the hate the show got was unfair. Now, since I made a couple of videos about High Guardian Spice, one after watching the series and one talking about one of its writers, Kate Leth, and I wasn't very charitable about the show in either of them, I guess I am one of the people who contributed towards the negative discussion of the Crunchyroll series. So, having read today's new comments on it from Rodriguez, I thought it would be interesting to look at what he says, and how much it does defend, or at least explain, the bad aspects of High Guardian Spice, versus how much my position as a hater remains unchanged by his thread. I won't be talking much about the replies to his tweet thread, however, because he set it so that only people he follows can reply. I'm a bit conflicted about that as a choice with this thread, to be honest. It is very easy to take that as him wanting to preserve an echo chamber and not see any responses from people who aren't going to be supportive. And personally, I do tend to think it's a bit cowardly to say anything which addresses an audience who have opposed you in the past, without enabling those people to reply. If you're addressing critics of your work and telling them why their criticisms are, in your opinion, unreasonable, that should really be a discussion, not a one-way lecture. Plus, if you allow people to interact with what you're saying, it'll get more reach, and is more likely to actually be seen by the people whose minds you want to change, who are the ones outside of your own social media bubble. This tweet thread also isn't entirely a defense of the product they made under the circumstances the studio were put into, which would seem reasonable as just a statement. It's also a dig at the motivations of the people who were complaining about the series, bringing up the culture wars and all that stuff. So it really feels like it would have been more professional for it to have been a discussion rather than a statement. Not being able to reply tends to make people feel more like they're being scolded than like someone's trying to discuss their side of something with them, and that tends to get people's backs up. But on the other hand, I did say in my review of the series that it did feel like someone, somewhere along the line, probably did have some passion for what was being made, and I think it's always been clear that that was Ray Rodriguez. I can see how if this was his baby and it ended up not living up to his vision, probably having that pointed out all the time and having people tear apart every aspect of it, when a lot of the weak points weren't what he originally intended, probably gets very draining. And I guess it's not unreasonable for him to prioritise his emotional well-being over professionalism. It is what it is, I guess. Still, what does the tweety thread have to say? Well, first Ray talks about the budgetary limitations the studio faced in making High Guardian Spice. He says, High Guardian Spice had a very small budget. We were the first show of a non-union studio. If you're mad at the animation quality, it was the budget. Background art, budget. Writing, budget. We literally started storyboarding the first episode before the script was finished. So when we inevitably ran into problems, all productions do, we didn't have the time or money to slow down and fix them. We had to barrel forward and make do with what we had. Now, you can certainly blame some of the things on having a small budget. Animation, backgrounds, for sure, if they'd had more money, the production quality would no doubt have been better. But the writing? Well, maybe on an episode-to-episode level, you could say that they had to rush. But surely when you first conceived of the series, before you even pitched it to anybody to get a budget, you should have already decided what the story was going to be, what the setting was going to be like, those things that would inform the writing. You can't say that the story was weak or the world building was non-existent because you didn't have enough money. Those would more be signs that the story you wanted to tell wasn't developed enough to be ready for production in the first place, or that you and the people who greenlit your show as a concept were perhaps not prioritising the quality of the story or the entertainment potential it had, but rather something else. I'm gonna guess certain themes. Equally, think about a lot of the stories from popular, critically acclaimed anime series, the type I talk about on my channel, like ReZero or Mushoku Tensei. These started out as web novels written by aspiring authors with no budget at all, only the hopes that what they made would be noticed and deemed good enough for a publisher and later an anime studio to deem it profitable for a budget to be thrown at it. Those stories were also written very quickly. In the afterword of one of the novels in the A Certain Magical Index series, a series well known for its world building, the author mentions that he wrote that volume, a full-length novel, in 2 weeks. The whole of Mushoku Tensei was written in 2 years. Yes, screenwriting is different, but the anime adaptations lift a lot of dialogue right from the source material. If one guy can handle world building, characterization, and dialogue for stories that complex, with characters that go on to be that well loved, with no budget at all, then you can't really blame the low budget you had for the quality of writing on your show. It takes a good writer the same amount of time to write a good piece of dialogue as it takes to write a bad one. If you could only hire bad writers because of the low budget, that's one thing, but you were the creator. You should have had more for your writers to go on when they were first onboarded in terms of the plot, characters and world. So even with a rush and a lack of creative experience, they could have managed to answer such rudimentary questions in the story as, what even is a guardian? The writing was based on such flimsy world building that one of the things I suspect was most important to Ray Rodriguez, who is a trans man and voiced the character in question, that is, the trans representation, was handled in a way that completely logically broke the setting. The LGBT content was so clumsily handled in general that none of it really went down very well with LGBT audiences either. It was very well documented when the narrative was being pushed that only homophobic and transphobic alt-right incel anime fans were leaving bad reviews, that actually that wasn't the case. Now, Ray Rodriguez might well have wanted the representation in the show to be better, or at the very least to be less heavily scrutinised, perhaps thinking things like transition magic could just be seen as a fun wish fulfillment thing that people wouldn't think too hard about. But again, if as the creator he'd been stronger on the concepts in his creation at the start, knowing he wanted trans characters and wanted a magical fantasy way for that to work in the setting, and he'd thought through how that was going to work within that world in a coherent way, that could have informed the writers. Even hacks like Kate Leth could probably have achieved better results. It's not a budgetary thing. Your budget was low, sure, but did your project deserve a higher one in the state you pitched it in? These things aren't funded so you can live your dreams. It's business. How much money has High Guardian Spice actually made for Crunchyroll? If it made a loss, which it possibly did, then saying it was a bad decision in funding High Guardian Spice at all, a show which was never likely to appeal to its subscribers anyway due to not being anime, would make more sense than saying they should have given you more money so the preachy story wouldn't have had to use JPEGs of bread and stuff for the backgrounds. The next point in the thread addresses the anime thing. People compare High Guardian Spice to anime because it's on Crunchyroll, but it isn't anime. It's a cartoon made with the same pipeline as any other American cartoon. Our budget was comparable to a Cartoon Network show, which are usually 11 minutes long and are comedy-centred, and have much simpler backgrounds and characters. What we were trying to make was incredibly ambitious for what we were working with, and we did the best we could. Maybe in another timeline, High Guardian Spice would have got the budget and schedule it needed to reach its full potential. In this case, I think he has a point. Most of the hate, and I said this in my review too, was really just the result of the fact anime fans, who don't really overlap that much with Cartoon Network audiences, were noticing the show and also feeling like Crunchyroll were using our subscription money to fund it when they could have been spending that on licensing more of the Japanese content we actually subscribed for. None of that is the fault of Ray or the studio. I mean, it was a very bad fit for Crunchyroll to begin with, and of course the studio weren't going to turn down the chance to make a show for a major platform, even if they pretty much knew they weren't going to be making something the majority of anime fans would be interested in. But you can't really blame audiences for comparing it to anime when Crunchyroll, the anime streaming service, is telling us it's a Western take on anime. You also can't blame us for reaching the same conclusion you did here, which was that it's not anime and shouldn't be compared to it, because it'll always look shit. Now, in the last few tweets of the thread, Ray talks about the stuff I think is a little harder to agree with. He says, and also, in another timeline, maybe High Guardian Spice wouldn't have been roped into the culture wars from its first trailer, and marked as bad years before it came out. But alas, this is the timeline we're in, and all I can do is shout about it on Twitter. Instead of piling on to the High Guardian Spice's trash campaign, maybe think about what happened behind the scenes to make it that way, have empathy for the real human beings who did their best working on it, and think critically about who started this hate campaign in the first place. Yeah. The thing about that is, the reaction to that trailer was 100% predictable, and it was justified. Focusing on the identity politics behind the team making the show, and not in any way on what it was going to be about, was always going to make people assume that things like an all-female writing room was a more important selling point for the people behind the show than the actual merits of the series as a piece of media. If you didn't have anything to show other than concept art, then first of all, why make a trailer at all? I'm sure nobody was insane enough to think people were going to be signing up to Crunchyroll in droves in anticipation. And secondly, if you had to make it, and you genuinely didn't want the reaction it got, why not focus on literally anything other than the identity politics stuff? If you'd spent the entire trailer just talking about what qualifications the staff had, or which software and animation techniques you were using, it would have been boring, but it at least wouldn't have made people write off the show as political. So no, you weren't trying to avoid that, and you weren't a victim of being dragged into the culture wars. The trailer was very blatantly trying to take advantage of the culture wars and entice people on one side to defend your show, sight unseen, while also making it possible to denounce people who hated the tone of the trailer as misogynists or whatever ists or phobes. Whether that was Ray's decision or Crunchyroll's or whoever's, it's just extremely obvious. The timeline you want to exist then, where people hadn't already decided they didn't like the show based on the trailer, is one where you didn't make the trailer, or made a less politicised trailer that just showed it was a cartoon about a magic school. The timeline where you had a bigger budget is one where the project was better thought out and more clearly targeted towards an audience where it was likely to be profitable. Saying you tried something ambitious and it kind of failed is fine. It's good, in fact. Saying that people should cut it some slack because you did the best you could at the time is also reasonable. But trying to pass off the blame for the bad decisions made internally to the nebulous concept of the culture wars, especially when among those bad decisions was a very clear attempt to pander to one side of that and bait the other in the show's early marketing, just comes across as kind of dishonest. So, in conclusion, it's a mixed bag. I think some of what Ray says does justify things like the mismatching background art and, well, he didn't actually mention this, but the awful soundtrack. But those are things we've overlooked in other shows as minor flaws, if the story and characters, the things we're normally watching a piece of fiction for, are good. I think he's also fair in saying people did work hard on it and don't deserve the hate. But then hating the result of something a team of people made is still valid. It's not a personal attack on someone to say that the thing they were involved in some capacity wasn't very good in the end. If a game comes out and everyone notices it's full of bugs, is saying so a personal attack on the individuals in the dev team who worked hard to get it done? No. Everybody who works in a creative field has worked or will work on something at some point that people don't end up liking. It's not the duty of the consumer to give everybody a pat on the head and a bunch of validation just because they tried. Most people work hard at what they do. You're supposed to work hard at what you do. Now, nobody deserves to be attacked, but criticism, yeah, that's just part of creating anything. Just learn from it and move on. It does sound to some extent like that is what Ray is doing, so I wish him the best. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. I know it's been 2 commentary type videos in a row now, but I was feeling a bit burnt out from the usual content after a very busy week of uploads last week, and so I felt like covering some topical stuff people have been asking me about for a change. Still, I am also working on writing the Mushoku Tensei Laplace video I promised, so look out for that soon. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon who are on screen right now, and thank you too to everyone who subscribes to my channel and watches my videos. Thank you for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.